Well, welcome to the Everyday Discernment podcast. I'm super excited today to be here. I am with Jonathan Roumie. If you have seen the Chosen series, you definitely know who he is. He's an actor. He played Jesus in there, and he's with me today. So before we go into anything else, welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tim. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
Like everyone, I didn't know what The Chosen was, and I saw it and blown away by it. And we're going to definitely talk about that and as much time as we have here today to go into as much as you can share. But before we get into all that, just let everyone know a little about yourself and any personal info you'd like to share.
I've been out in California 10 years. I'm from New York originally. I'm also, I was a bit of an illustrator back when I was in school. I still dabble from time to time. I'm also a musician, a drummer, percussionist. Occasionally I'll sing. I was in a band till about 4 years, till about 2017. And we traveled around the country for a bit. Wrote some music, played a lot of music, and that was a fun phase. And about a year after I got back from touring, The Chosen came a knocking. So that's pretty much been my life for the last couple of years.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what is the history of you being a Christian? What positive influences have you had in your life? How long have you known Jesus, had a relationship with him?
I was baptized as a baby, so I've always had the presence of God and Christ in my life for as long as I can remember. My parents are both pretty active and faithful Christians, and raised me with a healthy fear of God.
Yeah.
Me and my sisters and I. I think, I went through most kind of lukewarm phases as young people do, when, independence sort of takes front and center in your life when you're like exploring the world and figuring out who you are and where your priorities are at. But it never left me.
Awesome.
So it was always there. And then I think as I've come to, struggle as an artist, especially leaving New York, coming to LA, right at the height of of financial collapse back in 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
It was a lot of that was about just putting my faith in where I felt I was meant to be, and then struggling for a solid 8 years trying to do that very thing. Until I completely let go and surrendered it all and vowed to kind of let God take the reins, whereas I had been doing my darndest to keep everything, in my control and in my grasp up to that point. I just kind of hit my limit where I realized I couldn't do it on my own anymore. And I had professed a certain level of faith and surrender, but I realized quickly in this one moment on a Saturday in May that in 2018, that I hadn't quite committed in the way that I needed to. And once I did that, everything changed. 3 months later, I got cast in The Chosen, and it's been quite a phenomenal voyage, and continues to be. So here I am.
That's amazing. I think back to when you said your parents had a healthy fear of God, and my dad was a pastor, and so I grew up a PK, and I think back to when they used to say, whenever I would tell them something, they'd always say truth before Jesus. And that was kind of the caveat where, okay, I can't lie at this point, because if I say anything that's not the truth before Jesus, then, I had the fear that I don't know what would happen, but it was just funny back then how they used that to kind of get me to tell the truth. So,
but I don't know if it was as pronounced or as prescribed in my case. I think it was just, it was just sort of like, really having the understanding that God is in charge of everything, and everything that we do has consequences for everyone else we come into contact with, and how important it was, given that, we grew up even in just a basic middle class society that, you know, even knowing that we weren't at the on the higher end of the spectrum financially, that we had more than so many other people growing up in this world, and so that we had to remember that and respect that.
That's good. So how did you get started in acting? When did you start, and what was how did that start?
I went to film school. I always knew that I would be in the arts somehow. And then when I got out of school, I needed a job. Private art school prepares you for the life of an artist, and necessarily means that you're not exactly prepared as to how to make a living when you come out of art school. Thereby, being a self-fulfilling prophecy of starving artists. You're like, wait a second, what do I do now as a film major? I wasn't the genius that the world doesn't see me as the genius I thought I was as an artist, as a filmmaker. That movie I made didn't get into the Student Academy Awards, and I didn't win, and I don't have a career now as a director at the age of 22. So I got to figure out how to work in this business and do something. So, like you do, you call up your friends and see who's working as a PA, as a production assistant, a gopher, basically, in layman's terms. And you try to just do your best to survive and make, friends and build relationships and just get in the industry. It's like that in and of itself is a miracle to achieve. And once you get there, you're like, okay, I'll just do whatever. And for most people, that's how they get into the film industry. And then that becomes, they find a track and then they ascend that ladder and have careers as in positions that they didn't necessarily plan. So for a few years, I worked in art department. I was what they call a set dresser or set decorator. So if you've got a set that has all sorts of stuff hanging on the walls, or fabrics or furniture and stuff in the room, the thing that the actor isn't physically using in a scene, all that stuff is called set dressing. If I grab this in a scene, this is now called a prop, and this goes to a separate department overseen by a separate union from the set dressers union, the art directors union. Yeah, it's all when you get into like unions. I mean, there's everything is a different union. The light that goes on the stand are two separate unions. You have the lighting union. Well, it's the same union, but two different departments. So you have the lighting department, you have the grip department. Same thing with art department. So I was a set dresser for a couple of years. I worked on a lot of seminal hip hop videos in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I got a job on a movie as a location assistant, which is a location PA. And I really liked working with those guys and having a steadier amount of work than just a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks there. This, I could get on a job for 2 months maybe. And that was great. While I was doing that, I decided to take a stab at voiceover work. I was always a really good mimic, and I could do celebrity voices and stuff like that at the time. And there was a show on MTV called Celebrity Deathmatch, in which these clay animated celebrities would fight each other in a ring.
Yeah, I remember
and that. they needed people to sound like those celebrities. So I literally wrote to the casting director like a letter, and she actually responded to my surprise and said, I said, hey, I do impressions. I'd love to audition. And she said, hey, why don't you call this number? It's like a hotline. And then you leave like a recording of your best impression. And I probably did like a Brando impression or something like that, which is what I knew really well. I was very much into Brando, especially around that time after college. And then she started booking me for shows, and I did 3 seasons of that show. And that was my introduction to acting.
Awesome.
Eventually that led to commercials, and then that led to agents, and then that led to a couple of little TV parts in New York, a couple of movies, some small parts in bigger films that I also happened to have been a location scout on. I would always say, hey, I'm also an actor, and I would drop off my headshot, my 8x10 photo with a resume, which had nothing on it, but I had some stuff like in voiceover. So they were willing to say, okay, well, we'll come audition. And I booked a couple of jobs that way. And then cool. I decided to come out to LA.
I
start
saw you
all over.
played John Wilkes Booth. I saw you played that. Played him.
Yeah, it was the second movie I ever did, in a movie called Saving Lincoln.
Awesome.
And yeah, it was great. I had a really good time on that film. It was really a bit of a challenge, and really interesting learning about the politics of the South, and trying to make a guy that's widely considered a bad guy justified in his actions, because bad guys never really think they're bad guys. They're just fighting for a cause that the majority of everybody else disagrees with. So
right. So I usually ask people this as an icebreaker, but I'm definitely curious, being that you're in the industry, but what's your favorite movie of all time?
that's an impossible question to answer. Yeah.
It's like picking your favorite child.
Yeah, and I don't even have kids, so yeah, that'd be hard to say. I mean, I just, for instance, I just watched the other day. I caught Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I hadn't seen that in years. Steven Spielberg, Harrison Ford, and that movie still holds up. It's so good. Early Spielberg stuff. Anything with Daniel Day-Lewis, pretty much I'll watch. Is just fantastic.
Definitely.
Speaking of Lincoln, they collaborated on Lincoln, and
cool.
Yeah.
So I noticed a lot of video game voices in your career, some big titles too. I was surprised, because I'm a gamer myself. That's how I like to unwind. Is there any game you particularly like to play, or a project that you enjoy doing the voice for?
I think that one of my favorite projects was one of the first games I did here in Los Angeles, which was a game that was kind of panned, called Lost Planet 3, but it was a really it was a fantastic story, and a really well written characters, but I think the gameplay didn't live up to gamers expectations. Yeah. But I got to play about 10 different characters in that, but the main one was this French guy who was like one of the bad guys for most of the game, named La Roche. And so I got to do motion capture for that, which is really cool. I did some work recently on Ghost of Tsushima. Yeah. And that was pretty cool, doing some samurai stuff for that game. Also, I had some fun on God of War 4, which was pretty cool. Fallout 4 was awesome.
Those are all big games.
I played a couple of those games, but I find I don't spend enough time where I'm completely comfortable with the consoles yet. And it's like, just as I start to get comfortable, they they don't ship that much, but like the technology shifts a bit. And I also no longer find myself with as much time, because I'll just get sucked into it. And I'll literally play for 6 hours straight. And like, where did my day go? I've got so much I need to do. Yeah. Why did I do that? Exactly. So I kind of stick to like now voicing them, and I'll collect the ones I can get that I've done just to have them. And then every so often I might dip into them, and I started playing Spider-Man, again, recently. I wasn't in that, but it's one of the newer games. Well, not so much new now, but one of the games that I had that I picked up recently, where it's like, it's another one I could just get lost in the world and just noodle around in the world. I don't even have to do the game. It's like just how fascinating and how well mapped out these worlds are. It's incredible what the realism and the detail.
Yeah, it's almost like an escape, just come home and, spend some time in another world. And like you said, if you don't have some discernment about it, then you're going to be lost in time. And I've definitely looked down before and been like, oh my goodness, it's 3 a.m. and I got to get to work tomorrow.
Where did the time go? Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's jump right into The Chosen. First of all, it was an amazing series. I'm so excited to see more from season 2, and even to rewatch it again. And I've heard so many positive reactions just from people I know in my small circle. And I'm happy to see all the good reviews published as well. And it has a 9.8 out of 10 on IMDb, which is, I'm sure that's unheard of. It's pretty
phenomenal.
Yeah. And so what have been the reactions that you've received personally? And did you know how, when you were making it, how special it would turn out? And I ask that because, a lot of times when your head's in a project, no matter what it is, you're not sure how it's going to be received. And I'm sure you kind of had the same thing, or did you just kind of know like, hey, we're onto something here. This is going to be awesome.
I mean, I felt when I first read the scripts, I knew that there was something special. And I worked with Dallas 3 times before on 3 separate occasions before for shorter projects. And even then they were really just emotionally moving and beautiful projects to work on. So I went into the process when he actually called me to tell me that he was doing a series, and being fortunate enough to get the call that he wanted me to work on it, and that I didn't have to re-audition for the part. I didn't have to win the role again, because sometimes that happens. And that as actors, you're when you've been doing it long enough, you don't really take anything for granted, no matter what the past has dictated. You just don't know all of the scope of what's going on behind closed doors and behind, with executives and with, what the people putting the money forward want to see. And in which case, we were crowdfunded. So luckily that didn't affect us as much in this situation, but you just not knowing. I didn't take anything for granted. So I knew we would get at least 4 episodes done. And I said, for 4 episodes, I'd love to try my hand at this again. And I'd been playing Jesus for about 5 years in a number of different projects at that point, mostly local stuff like passion plays and the jobs I did with Dallas, and then one other project that I had done. The first one I had done 6 months before I met Dallas. And so, I really found myself just grateful to have the opportunity to even, tackle it again. And so reading the scripts and seeing how beautiful it was, I thought, if we can even capture 50% of what the scripts are communicating on an emotional level, like, we'll be in really good shape. And then we exceeded that with the way everything turned out, with the music, with all the other actors that were involved. And when you're making it, you're not actually thinking, like, I wonder how this is going to, you kind of know it's going to affect people. Yeah. We had a little bit of those conversations on set, like, because we would shoot a scene and you could just feel the presence of the Spirit, kind of working through the words and through the words taken from scripture and the gospel, and approaching it with a sense of reverence and holiness for the characters is something that everybody, ostensibly, happily contributed to in this work environment. So we kind of knew that it was going to touch some hearts, but you can't really anticipate how far-reaching and on what level of at what depth you're going to touch people. And the feedback that we've all gotten, and myself as well, is very singularly, is just, it's nothing short of awe-inspiring, and purely by the grace of God, using me as a conduit for the Spirit to touch people and to really energize something that is within them already. So it's been phenomenal.
That's amazing. So I didn't even know you played Jesus for 5+ years, in other roles. So what was your mindset going into playing, the most influential and greatest person of all time on film? I imagine it's intimidating, and sometimes the weight of the role can maybe be overwhelming, but I'm not sure, how do you go into that and kind of balance all those emotions?
Yeah, it can be. And there was one moment when we were filming episode 6 where it actually caught up with me when I started to I started to preach parables to the crowd at Zebedee's door before the paralytic is lowered in through the roof. Yeah. For anybody hasn't seen, we cover that parable in episode 6, among other things. And as I started to preach Jesus's words, it kind of dawned on me, like the weight of this all of a sudden hit me like a ton of bricks, and I needed to like catch my breath for a second. And we were moving at a pretty brisk pace because it was mostly about getting the reactions of the people outside the door listening to what I was saying, but I didn't feel like I was doing what I needed to be doing. So I needed to I needed to express that to Dallas, and he was gracious enough to give me the time to listen. And I had a bit of a breakdown where I was like, I'm having a hard time. And he's like, why? And I said, I don't feel worthy to be saying these words.
Mm.
And he put his hand on his shoulder and he said, listen, man, none of us are worthy, but we are here right now telling this story to bring this to the rest of the world so people can understand, just what it is that he meant to the world. Some version of that, he said to me. And so, yeah, that really kind of took the weight off of myself. And you also have to be very spiritually attuned to what's happening and the energy that goes into creating a project like this, and all the things that will try to work against you and prevent you from bringing Christ's message to the masses.
Oh, yeah.
So I was in constant prayer, before every scene, every day. The first thing I did was find a church when I got into town. We were shooting in Texas, so I found a local church. I'd go to mass whenever I could. I'd receive communion. I'd go to confession just so I could be spiritually purified, just like literally and physically as emptied out of myself as possible, to allow just a clean kind of conduit for the Spirit to work and hopefully elevate what was on the page through my performance, and be able to reach people and touch people in that way.
It's really good. I won't watch season or episode 6 again without thinking about that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So is there an actor who played Jesus in the past that you looked to or admired or looked to for inspiration when you started playing Jesus?
It's admired, yes. Inspiration would suggest sometimes where, I'm trying to base a performance on somebody else's work, which should never be the case for any actor playing any part that's been
Sure.
played by another actor, because, it's like me, wanting to look at a Warhol or a Picasso and paint my version of a Warhol or Picasso. And people be like, what are you trying to paint, a Warhol or a Picasso? Be like, no, this is my style. And they're like, well, clearly it's not. It's a Warhol or a Picasso, and it's not nearly as good. So why don't you do your own style? It's the same
Right.
thing as with acting. When you look at it as an art form, there's so much of yourself that goes into a performance. That said, inspired by Robert Powell from the miniseries Jesus of Nazareth in 1977, had a profound effect on me as a child, even from the tender age of 10, 11, 12 years old, when they would air in the 80s, when I growing up as a kid in the 80s, they would air that every Easter. Now maybe on like TNT, you could still probably watch it every Easter still, because it was just so good. Seeing that left a profound impact on me. In that, I remember one year, I probably was 12 years old when I had seen the miniseries one Easter season, and I was so moved by his portrayal of the Passion and the road to Calvary, to Golgotha, that I after watching it, I went outside in my backyard. I got a couple of 2x6s. I built a crucifix, like a life-size crucifix for a 12-year-old. I hammered nails into the boards where the hands were and where the feet were, and I painted blood. And I literally processed around my backyard, walking around until I got to my garage, and I planted the cross against the garage. I put a cinder block to hold it upright, and I would stand on the cinder block and just slide my fingers in between the nails and pretend I was on the cross.
What'd your parents say?
I don't know. I don't remember them saying anything. And I'm wondering, why didn't they say anything? And how did not the cops show up?
Yeah.
After like saying, what's your son walking around with a first century Roman torture device? What's going on here? What are his influences right now? So
we need an intervention or something.
Yeah. So that was pretty impactful. And I always, I loved the kind of mystical majesty that he brought to his characterization. And as well as, and Jim Caviezel, you can't ignore Jim Caviezel in The Passion. The pain he went through was literal in much of that film. And then the flashbacks passion were beautiful. I would want to have seen more. We have the a sort of an unfair advantage of having time at our disposal in a series so that we can explore those things and really get into what his personality might have been like, what it was like to travel with disciples, what first century life was like on the road as an itinerant Jewish preacher. All these things we get to explore in a way that hasn't been done before. So I feel so supremely blessed and grateful to be the guy that gets to do this for a living.
That's so cool. One of my inspirations was Bruce Marciano. He played Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, and I remember growing up watching that, and it was cool, first of all, because it was like every verse of Matthew was played out, and they didn't add anything to it, and just kind of what he brought to the role. I never saw kind of a Jesus portray that type of joy and charisma, I guess, for lack of a better word.
It's been a while since I've seen the Gospel of Matthew. I got to go back and look at it.
Yeah. Cool. So I love how Dallas tells of how they took very seriously the interpretation of the Bible into writing of the script. And even though, it's not word for word, it's not intended to be. And the beginning of Chosen even points people back to make sure you read the Bible. And I love that when I first saw that. And Dallas even tells of how his wife would have discernment in meetings or watching scenes that they needed to change based on promptings of the Holy Spirit. So can you share how it was working in this maybe godly tension of staying true to the Bible, but also expanding on the characters and the situations of the time?
That's more of a question for the writers, because I really didn't have participation in that part of the process. In so much as I could contribute through my performance with maybe some stuff that wasn't necessarily written on the page. Sure. But always, the basis for everything that I would do that's not on the page is rooted in who do I perceive Jesus to be?
Sure.
Who is he as it's written here? Does that line up with my idea of who Jesus is? And it did, and it does. And if it didn't, I might not have been the guy that he would have wanted to play Jesus, for this series. But we've, Jesus has been our sort of connector for 6 years now, 5 when we started filming The Chosen. But as friends, that's what brought us together, and it's because we have a shorthand with regards to these stories and the characterization of Christ as it plays in his stories that I think it works well. I read a lot. I read the Bible a lot. I also read a lot of extra biblical materials and sources from theologians and scholars and priests and people that are not only looking at the divine nature of Christ and the philosophy of Christ, but also the humanity, the sociopolitical implications of Christ as a Jewish preacher living in occupied Israel, Roman occupied Israel in the first century. So there's so much that comes into play. There's so much that we don't know. There's, because the Gospels themselves differ in their perceptions of certain accounts, because a lot of it was oral tradition transcribed into Aramaic, into Greek, into English. There's a lot that we kind of miss in translation. One of my favorite books is Jesus, a Pilgrimage by Father James Martin. And he kind of takes the setting of his first pilgrimage to Israel as a way to kind of map out a combination of all of those elements. What was the divinity? How did it root itself? And how was it situated in the social culture of Nazareth at the time, of Galilee? What was, the economics of the town, of Christ growing up in a backwater village, of Nazareth? Like, how did that affect his choice of wording and messaging within his parables? The examples that he used specifically, the rocky ground, the fertile soil, the thorns, the weeds. Like, you could go at the shores of the Sea of Galilee and see all of that stuff right there and talk about that stuff. And the people would look down and be like, oh yeah. And he spoke to people with what, you know, regarding what they were familiar with. He met people where they were at in their lives, whether it was the call to Simon, I will make you a fisher of people, you know, whether it's, you know, talking to shepherds, peasant shepherds, using, you know, sheep as an analogy. He always met people where they were in their lives, and really tailored his messages accordingly. And that, I think, is what made him so effective. So to kind of understand all of that stuff going into, you know, filming and telling his story, for me, just makes it easier to have a sense of reality and a sense of humanity and a relatability, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's great. And, you know, people can't see it, but I'm rocking the Chosen shirt.
Yeah.
But if you're on
I almost
the YouTube,
wore mine. I'm like,
yeah.
that'd be a little bit too on the nose.
Yeah. But I wrote a blog post about it, and then the marketing team at Chosen was so nice to send my wife and I shirts. And it's funny because she got the shirt that says "Get Used to Different," and we're like, this is the perfect shirt for 2020. You know, get used to different with everything going on. But
amen to that.
What really struck me about the series was how, you know, it's focused on the disciples, and it's supposed to be focused on them, you know, the chosen, and how, you know, sometimes I've read the Bible and, you know, heard how they instantly left their nets, and I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. You know, they followed Jesus right away. But what was the implication of that? What was the culture of the time? What was, you know, impacting them, their marriages and their finances and Roman oppression, and the dream they had of Messiah coming, and what they thought it would look like, and what Jesus actually came as, and how there was so much at play besides just, you know, instantaneously following him. And even though they did, you know, it's not that they weren't human and dealing with all these emotions. And so that really struck with me. And what are your thoughts on how that was conveyed, and also what it means for us today when we choose to follow Jesus? What parallels are there?
You know, I think it's just as hard now as it was then. You know, maybe even more so, when religion, I think, in the culture is kind of shunned or looked down upon, or thought to be an oppressor as opposed to a liberator.
Yeah.
You know, like in Jesus's day, you know, the government was the oppressor, the religion was the liberator, or had the potential to be. The Messiah would be the liberator. You know, like we don't have that same dynamic here, hence my hat. You know, I mean, you know, this idea that, for me, like, make America holy again. I saw this hat and I was just like, I gotta have that, because it's for me, this represents this idea, even with this silly little hat, represents this idea that there's something that we no longer have in the culture, that's no longer permissible, you know, by modern standards. And so to even espouse the ideas of faith as it relates to an improvement to society is completely countercultural. You know, I'm in the cancel culture. I mean, you look what people are trying to do to religious statues, you know, in the church, desecrating and beheading statues because people are seeing it as an oppression. It's like, it's crazy to me. If you actually dig into the lives of the people who these statues are honoring, they were actually liberators themselves of captors, and stuck up for indigenous peoples, and like saved indigenous peoples from horrific things being done to them by other governments that were in this country, for example. But I'm not going to get super political, but there's just there's this complicit will to ignore or just sort of disavow any kind of tolerance when it comes to faith or religion. And so, you know, I think now more than anything is where we have to stand our ground with our faith, and not be afraid to be people of faith. That is not to say we should go around smashing people in the face with Bibles.
Right.
That's not the way to do it. There's compassion, there's love, there's mercy, there's cool-headedness, there's calm, there's dialogue to be had.
Yeah.
There's turn the other cheek. There's everything that Jesus instructed us, knowing we would be facing what we're facing now through the Sermon on the Mount. It tells you everything you need to know. Just take the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, apply it to today. It still works. There's a reason why it still works. So, but we have to be bold. My whole thing, I was doing this public prayer hour that every day for about 3 months up until recently, when my schedule just got a little kind of wonky. And one of the main, concepts that came out of it for me was the need to be bold, but more importantly, to be humble,
mm-hmm.
and to lead with love.
That's good.
If you're leading with love in every action and encounter you have, well, you're following the model of Christ, no matter what it is, no matter what that person says or believes. If you lead with love and you're humble, you can still be bold. Do you know what I mean? So, and that's how I think we're going to win souls back. That and just praying for people, praying desperately for people.
Wow, that's so good. Amen to that. Yeah, and humility is not just being, weak or coward in a corner. It's mixed with love and truth, like you're saying, speaking the truth, but also in love, having the mix of it, because, if you just speak truth to people and don't have the love, it comes across harsh and people just get turned off to it, as opposed to leading with love, like you're saying, and mixing in the truth that will impact people's lives and change them. And maybe they don't even realize it, but planting those seeds and letting the Holy Spirit do the work. Awesome. Well, I have to ask you about season 2 of Chosen and whatever you're willing to say about it. So, generally,
there's only so much.
Yeah. So what is one thing you're looking forward to being back with the cast and crew again? And is there any particular Bible story coming up in the Gospels that you're especially excited about, playing out?
I don't remember how much Dallas has talked about publicly. Chances are there'll probably be a healing of some kind.
Okay, there we go.
So that's always Jesus always got some healing up his sleeve, I'm sure. But the thing I think that one of the things I'm really excited to explore is the furthering of the interpersonal relationships. Seeing more disciples at some point. I don't know how many, and also getting to work in that phenomenal set that we have. It's just incredible. They released where we're going to be filming in Utah, and the set that we're going to be filming at is just it's nothing short of epic. It's awesome. Absolutely epic. And as a location scout, I worked on $250 million movies, years ago. Money was no object. We don't have that kind of money, not even by a long shot. But the set that we got, it was an absolute miracle of God and a gift. And it's one of the most impressive sets I've ever seen, even in photos. I haven't been there yet, but I can't wait to get on. I mean, it's just immersive. It's huge. And it's just a recreation of first century Jerusalem, which doesn't exist in its present form in Jerusalem itself, in Israel, because of 2,000 years of evolution in building and architecture. So this is probably as close as people are going to see a recreation of what Jerusalem would have looked like in Jesus's day. So I'm super stoked about that.
That's amazing. I like the interplay between the disciples, and I'm looking forward to, John and Peter would often be competitive, and John would say he's the fastest one and the one who Jesus loves the most. And I'm curious if that ever comes out. That'll be funny to see.
Yeah. I couldn't tell you at this point. We've got I think 7 seasons in total that are planned. So
oh wow, I didn't realize that.
I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious to see what's going to happen where. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, I want to finish our conversation talking about the Hallow app you created. Just talk about that real quick, why you created it and what you hope people get out of it.
So just to clarify, I did not create the app.
Okay.
I'm featured on the app.
Gotcha.
Hallow is a prayer and meditation app. It's kind of like a Calm or a Headspace, but for prayer. There's something there for everybody. What I love about it is that it's ecumenical. There's stuff for Catholics, there's stuff for evangelicals, there's stuff for non-denominational, there's something for everybody. And it allows you to have, to build a consistency for prayer time, and as well as open you up to all different kinds of prayers that, you know, you might find effective that you maybe have never tried. I'm featured on it for a sleep story. So I think Matthew McConaughey did a sleep story for one of those other meditation apps. Mine is geared, of course, with prayer in mind, reading from the Gospel of Matthew. And fortunately, most people, when they put it on before they go to bed, most people can't stay awake through it, which is perfect. That means it's doing its job. Yeah. So, so you get to hear me narrate the Gospel of Matthew. And funny enough, approaching some of the material that may be crossing over for The Chosen for this, this coming season. Yeah.
So if someone says they fell asleep listening to you, you're not going to take it personally.
No, I'm good with it. Yeah.
That's the point of it. Awesome.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Well, that's the end of our time. And I really want to thank you for coming on and just give you a chance to anything you want to plug or where people can reach out to you or connect with you online.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been such a wonderful time together here. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Jonathan Roumie official. Same thing on Facebook, facebook.com/Jonathan Roumie official. Anything else is not me. There are some fake profiles up there. Stay tuned to some more collaborative stuff with Hallow. We've got some other things in the works, which I think people will really, really enjoy. So I encourage you, if you go to hallow.com/Jonathan, you can find, you can try the app, the full version of the app for 30 days for free. And then you can hear all my sleep story stuff. So hallow.com/Jonathan, and awesome. Get a taste of a wonderful, wonderful new arsenal to your prayer inventory. So
very cool. And if you haven't seen The Chosen, what are you waiting for? It's free. Download The Chosen app.
Now.
If you can, it's crowdfunded. So if you can put any money towards it to help further this project, even if it's buying the DVD, which I did, and be able to give it out, definitely consider doing that and bless this ministry and this project, because of what they're doing is just amazing. And so thank you again, Jonathan.
We're trying to get 1 billion views by the series ends. So we're at 50 million. So we got a long way to go. So people can pay it forward and send out DVDs. I just sent out a DVD to a good friend myself recently. So yeah, there's lots of ways to check it out, but it's super easy. Download it for free, App Store, Google Play. And and find me and say hello. And thank you so much, Tim, for your time today.
There you have it. God bless you, Jonathan. Thank you again.